Hello everyone, welcome to HIM 216, and this is our fourth lecture for Chapter 8. And in your textbook we're on page 147, and we're going to be looking at root operations as they are grouped there on page 147, and if you look over on pages 98 and 99, you will see them grouped in the same way. So they tend to group these kind of based on their intent. So we're going to be looking at root operations that remove some or all of a body part, and those are destruction, detachment, excision, extraction, and resection. If you need to, take time to come back over to page 98 and read the definition of those root operations. Now, your book tells you that some of the root operations that are easily confused are excision and resection. And that's because excision is it's either a biopsy or it's just taking out a portion of a body part, and resection is the entire body part. Now, there are some exceptions to this. There are some body parts that are further subdivided. The lobes of the liver are one of those. There's the right lobe and the left lobe. And if the entire lobe of a liver is removed, then it's considered to be a resection. It's the same thing with the lungs. The lungs are divided into lobes, and if an entire lobe is taken out, it is considered to be a resection. And the same thing with portions of the colon. On the top of on page 148, on the next 148, 149, and 150, there are some examples of some operations, some procedures that use these root operations. I'm going to talk about these, but then I have a PowerPoint slide that we're going to go through that goes into more examples in more detail. And in this first example, they're taking out the left lobe of the liver, and I want you to note that the root operation is resection, and that's because they're taking out an entire lobe of the liver. So if you, in the index, if you put in excision of the liver, you can see that you have the option of the right or the left lobe. In this example, it was the left lobe. And so basically at this point you are only choosing the approach, and because it doesn't tell us an approach, we choose open, and that's how we come up with that code. In the next example, it's a partial. I know immediately that this is an excision because it's partial right laparoscopic nephrectomy. So they did not take out all of that kidney. And so I can go to excision, kidney, and this was right. And again, it tells me that this was laparoscopic, so I know that my approach is going to be percutaneous endoscopic, and there's no device, and it doesn't tell us that this was diagnostic, so we are choosing no qualifier. So harvesting of the right greater saphenous vein, percutaneous endoscopic approach. Now, the saphenous vein is used very, very often in coronary artery bypass grafting. So this is a procedure that you have to code as a part of that. You have to code that when you're coding a CABG. And they actually only take out a part of the right greater saphenous. And you have to go to vein. And then you'll notice under vein we have greater saphenous. I can take... And this was actually on the right. And I've heard people say that they're healing from a CABG, that the healing of their leg was more painful than the healing from the actual bypass grafting. And you'll notice when this pops up, we have to fill in the approach, and we know that our approach was percutaneous endoscopic because it tells us that. And then there is no qualifier. This was done to harvest that vein for that CABG. And then on the 149, we have an EGD to control a bleeding ulcer in the stomach. So for this root operation, they used electrocautery. An electrocautery is actually, they burn the structure, whatever it is that's bleeding. And for this root operation, it is destruction. And it's the stomach. So it takes us to our table 0D56, and the approach for this becomes the EGD, and that approach is via natural artificial opening endoscopic, and there's no device and no qualifier. And so that is how we get to the code in this particular example. Now on page 150, your book begins discussing amputations, and quite fittingly the root operation for that is detachment. So if you look on page 98, detachment, cutting off all or portion of an upper or lower extremity. And so when we look at this right above knee amputation at the distal shaft, we know that detachment is our root operation, and it is a, well, I didn't type it right, I guess. It's leg, it's not lower extremity. So let's see, we don't need to be here. So we need to be at femoral region because this is a region. So when we go to detachment and we look at femoral region, this was actually on the right. No, that's not going to take us there either. Let's rethink this. Okay, so we're at detachment. And then we have leg. And this is above the knee. So it is the upper leg. And it's actually on the right. And so when we choose this code, it takes us to the table 0, Y6C0Z, and then we have to choose the qualifier of either high, mid, or low. And the qualifier that your textbook has chosen is 3 for low, and that corresponds to an amputation of the lower portion of the shaft of the body part, and that is what they have shown. I haven't worked with these. I would have thought that it would have been high, but they assigned low, or at least mid. Maybe did they assign mid? No, they assigned low. I would probably actually assign mid because above the knee is more of the middle part of the, well, it's the upper leg. It's not the lower leg. It's the upper leg, and it's the lower part of the upper leg. So that does make sense. So I retract what I said. It's the lower part of the upper leg since it's just above the knee. Now let's look at the debridement. There's a pulse lavage debridement of the skin. This falls into the root operation of extraction. When we're doing an extraction, we're pulling or stripping out all or a portion of a body part with the use of force. And pulse lavage is basically water shooting out of a tube a flexible tube, and the therapist actually takes this tube and puts it right to the area that they want to debride, and they use the force of water to remove that devitalized tissue. And so that meets the definition for extraction because they're using force to remove that tissue. Typically, anytime a non-excisional debridement is performed, the root operation is extraction. And so let's look at that in the index. If we go to debridement, non-excisional, it tells us to see extraction. Now, what we're actually extracting here is skin. So we have to put in skin, and the definition doesn't tell us that it's the skin of the right lower leg. We see that when we look at the example for body part. But if we look, we can see that we have a subterm for lower leg and then right. And that takes us straight to the code. Now, for your question for this lecture, I want you to code in exercise 8.1. I want you to code 1, 3, and 5. And when you're looking at number 3, this removal of a mole of the right upper arm, they're not removing the mole from the right upper arm. They're removing the mole from the skin of the right upper arm. Okay? And so now I want to go into the PowerPoint that I've prepared for us to look at these root operations. So we're looking at the excision, resection, destruction, extraction, and detachment. And I have some tips for you, and I've covered these in my lectures. Don't confuse your 2 with a Z. Put a line through that Z so that you know it's a Z and not a 2. Don't confuse the 0 and the O. You can clearly see here that there's a difference in the shape. Don't confuse the V with a U or an S with a 5. And clearly write your answers down when you're doing your homework. And I speak from experience. I went through a whole presentation one time, and I had confused my 2 and my Z and had those codes wrong. So I want us to look at diagnostic percutaneous biopsy of a peroneal nerve. And so just looking at this, what is our root operation? Well, the key here is the term biopsy. We know that biopsies go to the root operation of excision. And then what is our approach? Well, it's percutaneous. So our approach is going to be percutaneous. Do we have a device? No, we don't have a device. No device here. I don't see a qualifier. Well, the qualifier is, we do have a qualifier. It's diagnostic. So what we need to do is determine what our body system is. So I'm going to pull up, excuse me while I get over there. Okay, whoops. Sorry about that. Okay. So we are going to do excision, nerve, and peroneal. That easy. Once we can determine the root operation and the body part, then we can get to the code. When we get to that table, what is our approach? We said our approach was percutaneous, and this was diagnostic. So we know that our code is 01B H3ZX. Okay? All right, so let's look at the next one. Okay, so now let's say that we're doing an open excision of the peroneal nerve. How does this change our coding? Well, what it changes is the approach. You guys, I apologize for this. Usually I do a better job. Okay, so when we're looking at this code, for our approach, we go from percutaneous to open. So our code becomes 01BH0ZX. It's the only thing that changes. All right, so let's look at a diagnostic bronchoscopy with percutaneous biopsy of the left lower lobe of the lung. So what's our root operation here? Okay, so what are we doing? We're doing a biopsy. So that means our root operation is excision. What is our body system? Our body system is going to be respiratory. We'll look at that in a minute. What is the body part? Okay, so the body part is actually the left lower lobe of the lung. And what is the approach? The approach is via natural or artificial opening endoscopic, because to do a bronchoscopy, you go in through the mouth, down through the trachea, and into the left lower lobe. And then, is there a device? No, there's not a device. We didn't leave a device in. We're not even looking at none of these root operations involve a device. So what's our qualifier? Our qualifier is diagnostic. So we know that when we get to the table, we're going to want to go to biopsy, left lower lobe of the lung. When we get to that table, we know our approach is going to be natural or artificial opening percutaneous, and our qualifier is going to be diagnostic. So let's see if we can get over there. Okay. So we want to put in excision, lung, and this was the left lower lobe, so lung, lower lobe, left. So that takes us to table 0BBJ, and it was a bronchoscopy, so we know it was via natural or artificial opening endoscopic. There's no device, and it was diagnostic. Okay, so isn't this fun? Don't you think this is fun? All right, so now let's take a look at another one. All right, now this is an open removal of a portion of the left lower lobe. So how is this different from our previous example? Well, in our previous example, our approach was a bronchoscopy. This clearly says it's open. It's still the left lower lobe of the lung. It is still an excision because it's a portion of the left lower lobe. It's not the entire lobe, so it's still an excision. We're still in the respiratory body system, and it does not say that this was diagnostic, so there's no qualifier, and of course there is no device. Okay, so we're still at lung, and we're still at lower lobe. This is left, and we know that our approach is open and that there is no qualifier. So our code is 0BBJ0ZZ. Okay. Now let's talk about an open removal of the left lower lobe of the lung. So we know that our root operation for this is going to be resection because we're taking out an entire lobe of the lung. The approach is open. There's no device, there's no qualifier, it's the respiratory system. So let's go back. Oh my goodness. And so this time we're looking at a resection. Lung, lower lobe, left. Here, so we're resection and not excision because we're taking out the entire lobe. Our approach was open, so our code is 0BT J0ZZ. Now, in one of the last lectures, I talked about coding lymph nodes. If an entire chain is removed, it's a resection. If a level is removed, it's a resection. But if only some of the lymph nodes were removed, it's an excision. So you have to be careful when you're coding the lymph nodes, because typically it is an excision. Sometimes it's a resection in the pelvic area. Sometimes they will do a radical procedure where they remove all of the lymph nodes in a chain. So now let's look at this. We're doing a laryngoscopy with removal of vocal cord polyps of both the left and the right vocal cords. So let's talk about the body part. What is our body part? Our body part is actually the vocal cords. And our root operation for this is excision because we're not taking out the entire vocal cord. We're just taking out the polyps that are on the vocal cord. So that becomes an excision. And then what is our approach? A laryngoscopy. So this is natural or artificial opening endoscopic. We're doing both the right and the left vocal cord. So we're going to have to see if we have a bilateral code for that. And there's no device, and there's actually no qualifier for this. It doesn't say that this is diagnostic. So let's take a look and let's choose. Okay, so excision vocal cord. We don't have a bilateral, so we're going to have to code the left, and then we're going to have to code the right. So we're going to have two codes for this. So we said our our approach was natural or artificial opening endoscopic, and there is no qualifier. So this is our code for the left vocal cord, OCB V8ZZ. Now, if we want to do vocal cord right, we just change the body part, and that's the only character in this code that changes. Okay, so let's try a challenging one. Amputation on the left. We're doing the second, the third, and the fourth toes. And then we're doing an excisional debridement of the left foot. So we're going to have 4 codes. So if we're doing an amputation, then that is our root operation for that is going to be detachment because we're detaching those toes. And if we're doing an excisional debridement, this is excision. This is not an example of extraction. Extraction is used for non-excisional. When it's excisional, the root operation is excision. So what is our approach? This is an open approach. There's no other option for this. For the debridement, it is also open, and there is no device, and we will look at the qualifiers to see what is applicable. Okay, so we know we're doing a detachment of toes, and as a reminder, these toes were all on the left foot, and so we have the second toe on the left foot. And then for our qualifier, we have to choose either complete, high, mid, or low. And we are choosing complete. It was a complete amputation of those toes. So this is the code for the second toe of the left foot, 0Y6 S0Z0. Now we have to code the third toe of the left foot. So we just change our body part, 0Y6U0Z0. And then we also took off the fourth toe, 0Y6W0Z0. So those are our codes for the detachments. So that was pretty straightforward. And when we did our excision, we are doing it probably, well, let's see. If we choose the foot, and it's the left foot, it sends us to 0YBN. It's an open approach, and there's no qualifier. Now, when we read the report, if we knew that it was the skin of the left foot, we would code that as opposed to just the foot. So it would depend on what the operative note told us. Now, for this example, we're doing an open partial discectomy at L3. So what is our root operation? It's going to be excision, because we're taking out a part of a disc. Our root operation is open. Our approach is open. We have no device, and we have no qualifier. And what we are doing is an excision of a vertebrae. And it's a lumbar vertebrae. You remember it's L3. So when we go to excision and then vertebrae, we see lumbar vertebrae. We know that this was an open procedure. And there's no device and no qualifier. And now, if we go to discectomy, we will see excision lower joint. And this lumbar vertebrae is actually below the diaphragm, so it is considered to be a lower joint, and it's an excision. So we really actually would use this lower joint code for this example as opposed to the excision of the vertebrae. We're using lower joint instead of what we chose before was lower bone as opposed to lower joint. And we really need to choose lower joint. The root operation is excision, and this was a lumbar vertebral joint. It was still an open approach, and there's no qualifier. So to code this to the joint, we're going to code 0SB 00ZZ. Okay, now let's try we're going to do 2 more and then we'll be done. So let's code amputation of the left arm at the mid shaft of the humerus. So what is our root operation going to be? It's going to be detachment. And our approach is going to be open. There's no device and there's no qualifier. So this is the mid shaft of the humerus of the left arm. So let's go to detachment. And we have arm. And it's on the left, and it is the humerus, so it's going to be the upper arm, and you'll notice that the code pops in, and then what we are choosing is the qualifier. And we know that this was mid shaft, and so we choose mid shaft. Thyroidectomy in a patient with thyroid cancer, lymph nodes on the right side of the neck are removed, and that's diagnostic. So we're going to have 2 codes here. And this is a thyroidectomy in a patient with cancer, so they will take out the entire thyroid. So our root operation is going to be a thyroidectomy. There's no device, there's no qualifier. Our approach is open. So let me try. If I put thyroidectomy in the index, it tells me to see resection, and I know what we had. So this chooses for me the endocrine system. And we're choosing thyroid gland. We're not choosing the right or the left lobe. We're choosing thyroid gland. This is open, no device, and no qualifier. So 0GT K0ZZ. And then we have to do the excision of the lymph nodes because we did not take out an entire chain. And we are taking out, so we go to excision, and then we want lymph nodes, and these were in the neck, and they were actually on the right side of the neck, so we do neck, and then right, 07B1, and this was open, and this was diagnostic. So there are our codes for the thyroidectomy. Now I do want to demonstrate one more for you. And I want us to look at cryocautery of 3 lesions of the back. Cryocautery is destruction. There's no pathology there's nothing to send to pathology. When the procedure is such that it destroys the specimen, it's destruction. And this isn't 3 lesions of the back. This is lesions of the skin of the back. So let's go back and let's choose destruction, skin, back. So when we go to that code, for the qualifier, we had multiple. We had 3. So that's multiple. So our code is going to be 0H56XZD. So I hope you have found this lecture to be helpful, to help you understand, have a better understanding of how to look at the documentation and how to break down the code so that you can appropriately select the code. If you have any questions, please be sure and let me know.